Hi, my name's Megan. Welcome to my channel. Today I just wanted to do a story time about my experience with postpartum preeclampsia. It was just a really impactful experience for me, I guess is a nice way of putting it. And it's something that I had done research on and had looked into because I was at high risk throughout my pregnancy, but it wasn't something that I really kind of had a grasp on until I was in the situation. And so I just wanted to make a video to kind of go over my experience and, maybe someone else can relate, or if you are at high risk and you haven't had your baby yet, maybe there are some things in my story that you can kind of look out for yourself. So with that being said, I am not a medical professional. None of what I'm about to say is intended as medical advice. If you are feeling any symptoms or any concerns about whether or not you might have postpartum preeclampsia or any other health condition, please stop watching this video and go ahead and contact your doctor or go to the emergency room, because this is not something that you want to mess around with. So that's my disclaimer. I feel like I have to put that in there, but because I think sometimes I tend to say things like, oh, I recommend, or I would suggest, but I'm not recommending anything. Just disclaimer up front. This is just my story. It's just for entertainment and your interest. So let's get started. I am 40 years old right now. My daughter is 18 months old. So when I gave birth back in 2022, I think I was 38, I want to say. I was, 38. I was overweight, and I already had some pre-existing hypertension before I got pregnant. So I kind of hit and I was a first time mom, like first time giving birth to a baby. So those are all some things that would be, considered to put me at high risk for preeclampsia. So throughout my entire pregnancy, I was monitored by my OB. And then she actually went on maternity leave halfway through my pregnancy, but came back. So I saw different OBs in the practice. And then I also was followed by maternal fetal medicine. And those are just the extra specialists who keep a closer eye on things, just to make sure that I was continuing to stay healthy throughout the pregnancy and that my baby was continuing to stay healthy. So, this entire pregnancy, no big issues. I passed my glucose test for gestational diabetes, didn't have that. My blood pressure was being controlled with like some pretty minimal medication. And I was fine. I mean, everything was fine. Baby was growing fine. No big problems. I was taking a baby aspirin, like the 81 milligram aspirin, every day, just as a precaution. Sometimes doctors recommend that to prevent preeclampsia. And yeah, I was just doing my best to kind of not get it. But I think I also always in the back of my mind was thinking it's probably coming for me at some point. So anyway, when I got to the end of my pregnancy and it hadn't happened, I was like, okay, great. Wonderful. I'm so happy. And so I gave birth, I think at 38 weeks and 5 days. So almost, or 38 weeks and 3 or 4 days. But anyway, I gave birth. I tried for a vaginal delivery, pushed for 3 hours, baby was not in the right position. So I ended up with a C-section at like 1 a.m, which was not super fun, but it was fine. Like I had asked for a C-section to begin with, so it worked out. Maybe just not exactly the way I would have wanted, but that's okay. And then because of all that pushing and everything, my baby had like a hematoma on her scalp, just, like some blood built up under her scalp. And so I guess what happened is when that started to dissipate, she started, like, it was dissipating into her bloodstream, and then it caused her to get jaundiced. So fortunately, we were in the hospital for a longer period of time than we normally probably would have been in the hospital after a C-section. I say fortunately because about day 4 or 5 postpartum, I just started feeling really sick. I started feeling nauseous. First of all, I started vomiting every 2 hours, which I actually didn't know that was a symptom of preeclampsia, but it is. Spoiler alert. And so I started vomiting like every 2 hours, which was super uncomfortable with the C-section being so fresh. And I just felt awful. Like, I felt totally out of it. I was completely, I was just out of it. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, I was barely functioning. I had abandoned all hope of trying to breastfeed my daughter. My milk hadn't come in. Pumping was torturous. She wasn't latching. I didn't have the emotional or mental or physical fortitude to keep trying that. And so that kind of got put on the back burner. And in retrospect, I think I wasn't producing milk just because my body was so, it was under so much stress from the C-section and all of the anesthesia and just everything that had happened. And then on top of that, the postpartum preeclampsia. So I started throwing up. And then I believe I had kind of an abnormally high blood pressure reading. So that's the main symptom that people think about when they think about preeclampsia, is these higher blood pressure readings, like 140/90 or higher. At that point, I'm not quite sure what mine were. I want to say they were in like the 150s/90s, is my guess. So that was clearly a concern. So when the obstetrician came in, a hospitalist, if you don't know, is just like an obstetrician that only works in the hospital. Like, they don't see patients in their office. They only see patients in the hospital. So this obstetrician came in, who I hadn't really met before. And I had met her before, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, so she came in and I explained to her what was going on, and she looked at me and she was like, well, that's interesting. Like, I thought you were up and about, and I thought you had been eating okay and going to the bathroom okay. And I said, I was for a couple days, but now this is my current situation. And I really don't feel safe going home until we figure out what's going on. So we talked a little bit more, and she was just like, well, I don't know, let's see how you feel later. And that was just kind of her answer at that point. I was not satisfied with that. So I told my nurse that. I said, hey, like, I'm kind of concerned. This is really bothering me. I really don't feel well. I don't feel like I can function. I'm not able to pay attention. I feel super spacey, like out of touch with reality. We need to figure out what's going on. And also, I'm still throwing up every 2 hours. Like, it was like literally on the dot every 2 hours. I would just vomit, whether I had food or not. And so that was scary. And so I told the nurse, and the nurse was like, don't worry, like, we'll talk to her, we'll figure it out. So the doctor comes back a little bit later, and I say, hey, what if we check my urine? Because, throughout my pregnancy, that was one of the things I had to do. Every time I saw the maternal fetal medicine doctor, they would take a urine sample, or maybe it was the OB. Either way, I was giving urine samples quite frequently to see if there was protein in my urine, because that is another typical sign or symptom of preeclampsia. So I tell the doctor that, and I ask her about it, and she's like, yeah, that's, before you give birth, yes, that's an accurate test, but I don't know what the reason was, but basically she said postpartum, it was not going to be an accurate test. And I said, okay, fair. How about some blood work? Can we do some blood work? Is there any sort of test or anything that you can do that's going to give us some answers about why this is happening to my body right now? And meanwhile, I was still getting the higher blood pressure readings, but the other symptoms that are very typical, like headache, blurry vision, and pain, like right flank pain or right stomach pain, right-sided stomach pain, I wasn't experiencing any of those. And so whenever the doctors or nurses would ask me about those symptoms, I would say, no, like I'm not, my vision's fine, no headaches, I don't have any of those symptoms, but I'm throwing up and my blood pressure's high and I feel like I'm not going to be alive. So I asked her for the blood test. She said, I don't know. It says here in your chart that you have a history of anxiety. And I said, correct. I do have a history of anxiety, but I don't understand what that has to do with what's happening here. Because I had had many, many panic attacks in my life, and none of them felt like what was going on in that moment. So that was insulting and frustrating. And then the next thing that she thought was perhaps it was that the virus that, was part of the global situation that was happening a couple years ago. And so I said, I'm also fairly certain it's not that, but I'm happy to take a test if you think it would help. And she declined to give me a test for that. Because I don't think she really thought that's what I had. And so she basically walked out of the room and did not agree to do any testing or any blood work. And so I was furious, as furious as I could be in sort of the mental and physical state that I was in. And so when the nurse came back, who was wonderful and very kind and caring and compassionate, she, I explained what the doctor had just said, and I said, can you please somehow convince the doctor to order some labs, because I know that something's wrong. I am 1,000% certain that something is wrong with me. I am fairly certain that it is postpartum preeclampsia, and I don't understand why she's not willing to test for that. I said, so if you can convince her to do that, I would really appreciate it, because I truly feel like I might not make it through the next night, like if we don't do anything. And so, so thank God the nurse was able to get those labs ordered for me. I'm not sure what she said to the doctor, but whatever it was, they ordered the labs. And the other thing, sorry, just to backtrack a little bit, the doctor also said, oh, but I see your labs from before you gave birth. They look fantastic. Ma'am, that was like 5 days ago. That was before I gave birth. That was a whole other century. Like, that was a long time ago. I don't even know what planet I was on when those tests were taken, but this is a different situation. Like, things have changed. So anyway, as you can tell, I was not impressed with that physician, but she's who I had at the moment, and here we are. So the nurse got the labs, and within a couple of hours, the results apparently came in. And the moment that those results came in, the charge nurse on the floor and my nurse and several other nurses came running into my room, very concerned. They had an IV pole with magnesium in a bag to hook me up to. They also had, I think it was it metoprolol? It was either metoprolol or labetalol, probably labetalol, because they still thought I was breastfeeding. But anyway, they hooked me up to, it was labetalol. So they hooked me up to the magnesium drip and the blood pressure medication via IV. And the I will not forget the charge nurse's face. Like, she was angry, I think, at my doctor. And she also looked scared. And you don't often see, I work actually, I don't know what, not a spoiler alert, what is it? A caveat, I don't know, whatever, asterisk on this story. This hospital that I was in is the hospital that I worked at. I'm a counselor, but I was in a social work position doing discharge planning at this hospital where I ended up giving birth. So I knew nurses. I didn't know these nurses, but I know a lot of nurses. And you don't often see them get rattled or scared, especially if they've been working for a long time. So this lady was probably well into her 50s, and she had been there quite some time, and she looked extremely concerned. So I took that to mean that I had been right. It was postpartum preeclampsia, and I was in serious danger at that point. They said my liver enzymes were almost off the charts. My liver was heading towards liver failure, and I needed to be moved back from the mother-baby unit over to the labor and delivery unit because it was a more acute setting where they could monitor me more closely. So that's what happened. That was sort of the beginning of finding out that I had postpartum preeclampsia. And then the next, I don't know, several days were all just a complete frustrating, scary blur. A lot of emotional highs and lows, a lot of, thinking I was getting better and then I wasn't getting better, being put on a bunch of different medications. The labetalol the dosage that they gave me made my heart rate go super low, like into the 40s, and wasn't really helping with the blood pressure. So we switched that to, I don't know, hydralazine or who knows, I don't know what they did. But yeah, it was just a really scary experience. The magnesium drip, I was on it for 24 hours. When you're on a magnesium drip, you feel a little like heavy and fuzzy, I guess is the best way to put it. Like your body and your limbs feel kind of heavy, and your mind feels just a little like if you were watching on the camera, like there's just like grease on the lens of the camera. Like everything's just a little fuzzy, and blurry. And you can't really get out of bed while you're on that. So they had to do a catheter, which I had been really scared of, but it was not a bad experience. It was fine. And then they also put like those, I forget what they call them, but like those boots on your legs that kind of go like this with the air, like they keep the blood flowing in your legs so that you don't get blood clots, because that's another concern if you're hanging out in bed all the time and you're post-surgery. So that was fun to deal with. They had to give me a blood thinner as well. I think they gave me heparin. What else happened? So that was like a 24-hour situation. We were hoping that after that, everything would kind of like even out. It did not. I continued to throw up every 2 hours for that entire time. And it wasn't stopping. And I actually never developed pain, in my right quadrant, my right upper quadrant. That was never painful, but it did get numb. It was like a band, like if you have like a thick, like a wide band on your bra, it felt like that kind of under my breast, like on my rib. And so that was happening. And I explained that to my OB. I explained it to the gastroenterologist, explained it to the cardiologist, and everybody was like, oh, that's weird. I've never heard anybody describe it like that before, which I heard a lot in the hospital. And so that just kind of resolved on its own after, I don't know, about 2 weeks, I'd say. The vomiting also resolved after about 2 weeks. The blood pressure, I don't really know. I mean, I'm still taking blood pressure medication. It's been almost 19 months now. But like I said, I had hypertension prior to pregnancy. So until I am on a weight loss journey, until I lose more weight and continue my exercise consistently, I think I'll just be on blood pressure medication. But I am on a significantly lower dose and different medications now than I was when I left the hospital. When I left the hospital for the second time, I was on like major doses. Just wild, like 100 milligrams of hydralazine 3 times a day, plus I think labetalol twice a day. And then I eventually weaned down, like just to show you how large that dose is, I eventually weaned down to like 12 and a half milligrams. So from 100 3 times a day to 12 and a half a day, or 12 and a half 3 times a day. I was on a massive dose just to keep things like barely reasonable. So yeah. So anyway, so the blood pressure, I still have higher than average blood pressure. That's just my thing right now. And what else? Yeah. So like I said, that second time I got discharged. So the other part of the story is I did get discharged from the hospital, I think on a Thursday. And so it had been 1 full week since my induction. So I went home. I had convinced that same obstetrician that I was ready and I felt better. And she's like, okay, like all you have to do is keep your breakfast down and don't throw up. And then we'll let you go after lunchtime. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So I didn't throw up. And my blood pressure she was accepting like 150 over, I think 85 to let me go, which now that sounds crazy, but, so I met those criteria and I was like, get me home. I'm ready. Like I put makeup on and put a dress on and I was like, I would love to be in my own bed. I would love to get to know my baby because this whole time, like my husband and my mom were taking care of my daughter, and also my stepson at home. And so, yeah, so I was like going home. So I did spend that one night at home. And then that very next morning, I took my blood pressure and it was like 180 over 110. And I was like, whew, this is not good. Not good at all. So we went back to the ER, went back up to labor and delivery. When I was in the ER, they did like an echocardiogram and they did some other, like they did an ultrasound of my heart, I think. I don't know. They did a lot to see like cardiac wise if there was anything of concern. And there wasn't, which, okay. Who knows? I don't know. That's, I think, the frustrating thing about preeclampsia, especially postpartum preeclampsia, is that the medical field does not have a strong understanding of it. They really don't. And so, especially postpartum, because when you have preeclampsia, if it gets severe enough, the solution is to deliver the baby, right? You deliver the baby, you get rid of the placenta, and then everything's supposed to get better. And that's what they know. That's as much as they know. But when you develop postpartum preeclampsia, they don't really know. They don't know what to do. They're like, oh, well, your placenta's gone, so you should be better. It's like, but I'm not. So you got anything else? And they don't have anything else. They've got nothing. I think I saw 2 or 3 different cardiologists while I was in the hospital. I saw at least one gastro doctor, to see what they could do for my vomiting. Nothing. And despite me telling them multiple times that I was not planning to breastfeed, they still gave me a bunch of medications that were breastfeeding safe, even though they could have given me more effective medications with less side effects for me, because I wasn't breastfeeding. So nobody listens. Nobody listens. Nobody knows what's going on. I did go, like I said, I went back to the emergency room. They readmitted me. I was there for so I went back Friday. I was there Saturday, and then Sunday was Father's Day. And I spent most of the day willing myself to have a blood pressure reading in the 140s over 80s so that I could go home. And so I did. While I was in the hospital, I advocated for myself multiple times. Obviously, that first situation where I had to beg and plead for blood work, that was the first thing where if I hadn't intervened for myself, I'm not really sure what would have happened. I mean, I can guess, and it's not great. And the other thing where I had to advocate for myself and intervene for myself was they were not really planning to give me IV fluids because I was like ordering trays of food and liquids. I was trying to drink cranberry juice and Sprite and water, but I was still throwing up every 2 hours. And so any liquids that I had were just coming right back out. And because of that, I think my electrolytes were all over the place, and my body was not able to get back to a place of equilibrium and homeostasis. Like, it was just struggling. And so I had to ask the nurse, like, hey, you think you could get an order for some IV fluids? I would really feel better. And she did. So that was wonderful. And I also asked if I could have my blood pressure medication via IV for a couple of those days, because again, I wasn't sure if I was absorbing it because I was throwing up. So yeah, that's the gist of it. That was the sort of overview of what happened to me with postpartum preeclampsia. I think in total, I went to the hospital on a Wednesday night to get induced. They started that process on a Wednesday night, and I guess June 8th of 2022. June 9th was a Thursday. That's when like labor started and contractions and my water broke and all that. And then I gave birth on the 10th at like 1 o'clock in the morning. So basically Thursday night, but technically it was Friday in the morning. And then after that, from that point on, I stayed in the hospital, except for that one night at home. I was in the hospital until that following Sunday, so June 19th. So I went on June 8th, and I left on June 19th from the hospital, which is insane. Like, that's wild. That is way too long to be in the hospital without any answers, without anyone having a solid plan. But that's the reality. That's what happened. That's medicine right now, I guess. I don't know if a different hospital would have been able to handle it differently. I don't know if different doctors or specialists would have seen something similar and been able to do anything differently. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, I would highly recommend that you really talk with your partner or your family or whoever's able to be with you. Even if they can't be with you, have them on the phone on speaker whenever the doctors come in the room. I did that with my husband and my mom at different times, just so that you have another set of ears hearing what you're being told. whether that's for, cover your own butt purposes or legal reasons maybe down the line. I mean, I never pursued any legal action because I don't think they did anything wrong or illegal. It just was really frustrating and upsetting. But you never know. And then also, I think it's important to have somebody with you, just because when you are in crisis or you are feeling like garbage, it's really hard to take in objective information that you're being told, like what medications are being recommended or what the next steps are in your treatment plan or whatever. So it's nice to have another person to kind of be there to hear it with you so that you can all be on the same page. It's also nice to have another person with you, or even on the phone, to ask questions that you might not have thought of, or to push for things that you might be too exhausted to push for, quite frankly, or that you might not have thought of. So yeah, I don't know. I think just talking about it now, I did, to be fair, I did record a version of this prior that I didn't post for a variety of reasons, but so I think some of the emotion has kind of died out a little bit for me right now. But talking about it now, it's just still really frustrating. It's still upsetting. It's still a little enraging, honestly, that I think in general, just that there's not more research and understanding about postpartum preeclampsia. It just really stinks that people have to go through this. And it's also really scary because I was lucky that I was still in the hospital when these symptoms started happening, because a lot of people after they give birth are already, especially if it's like a vaginal delivery or a very typical C-section where you don't have to stay very long, they're already home by that point. Like they're already home, they're already maybe trying to take care of their other kids and the newborn, and just not in a position to really be paying attention to their body. And so, yeah, I'm just grateful, I guess, through all of that. I guess the silver lining is that I was still in the hospital and I was still in a position where I could really focus on my body and how I was feeling, and advocate for myself that way, instead of trying to go to the ER and convince somebody in the ER that my blood pressure numbers were bad enough to get admitted. So I think that's it. I think that's all for the story itself. I am, like I said, 19 months out from that now. I'm fine. I'm doing well. I am exercising. I'm doing intermittent fasting. I'm staying home with my kids, being as active as I can in the Midwest during winter. So yeah, I mean, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is another side, there is an other side, like you get to the other side of this, but when you're in it, it is definitely scary. It's frustrating. It feels hopeless on some days, I think. There were definitely days in the hospital where I just cried, because it's like, I don't know when this is gonna end, and all I'm doing is sitting here like staring at the walls. Like I quite frankly didn't even have enough energy to like scroll on my phone, which is saying a lot because I scroll on my phone a lot. So yeah, so there is another side. You can get to the positive of, having gone through it. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful. If you are currently pregnant, don't be freaked out. Hopefully this won't be your experience. I'm in a few different Facebook groups for people who experienced postpartum preeclampsia and regular preeclampsia, prior to birth. Most of them did not have to stay in the hospital that long. Most of them did not have to go back and forth. Some do, though. Some people do have to go back and forth a couple times to kind of get the meds figured out. But yeah, most people did not, that I have read or heard about, have not had to stay in the hospital for 10 days. So don't worry. But if you do, you're not alone. I did too. It's okay. We're gonna make it. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you so much. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. This is one of the first videos I'm putting out on my channel, so forgive me for rambling, and whatever editing happens, I apologize. This is all new, it's all learning, but this is one of the topics that I felt most passionate about sharing, and that I felt like, you know, maybe there wasn't a lot of information about. So thank you for watching. If you are so inclined, if you wouldn't mind subscribing, liking, all of that stuff that YouTubers say, I appreciate it, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much.